Hello, BookTube. I'm here with a cookbook discussion. Yeah, you've heard it right. A cookbook. A book about Captain James Cook, The Wide, Wide Sea, The Final Fatal Adventure of Captain James Cook. And it's written by Hampton Sides, and it was published just this year, 2024. It's unusual that I read current releases, but this was a gift by Freeman, who has on every occasion hit the sweet spot with books for me. And this definitely was a sweet spot. It was very good. I won't go into detail. I'll sort of go generally about it, and then I have a few niggling things about it, but we'll get to those as well. Now, as it says, it's about his third and final uh, expedition that started in the summer of July 1776 and ended when the ships returned. The Resolution and Discovery returned in October 1780. And it turned out to be the longest, or one of the longest voyages ever done, with over 1,500 days. And it also, not one person died of scurvy. There were deaths, but not of scurvy. Uh, Cook was very good at this. He did a sort of a scattershot view of this. Like he went through all like there were many uh, suspected reasons for scurvy, and he just sort of did most of them and made sure they were done. One of them was, a bad air in the ships, so he made sure that the men cleaned the decks and cleaned themselves and changed their clothing every week. But he also had other food and fresh fruit as well, which turned out to be the thing, which is vitamin C. But that wasn't really known for sure uh, what actually was the thing that stopped scurvy until the early 1930s, and it was discovered that it was actually vitamin C. They knew at a certain point that it was fresh fruits, hence taking lime juice along or lemon juice, but mostly British vessels took lime juice. But that was years to come, actually. But getting back to the beginning of the expedition, uh, Cook sort of finished his second expedition, also on the HMS Resolution, just less than a year before he returned, and he was retired, and he took up the captainship of the Greenwich Hospital, sort of basically the leader, the manager of the hospital, and it was a hospital in the sense of an old age home for sailors. But the Admiralty and the Royal Navy wanted another expedition, and what they wanted to do was uh, an expedition for the Northwest Passage. But instead of trying from the east, they thought they would try from the west, so going up over Alaska, and that was their thought for this. And originally, it was Charles Clark that was going to head up the expedition. But the Admiralty, the Lord of the Admiralty, I guess, yeah, it's Earl of Sandwich, or was it Lord Sandwich, I guess, at that point, wanted actually Cook. So Cook came out of retirement to lead the expedition. Now, also too, that he had an errand to do before the main part of the expedition started. On his second expedition, there was two ships as well. There was the Resolution and the Adventure. They got separated, but on the Venture was a young Tahitian man named Mai or Omai that was brought back to England, and he became a celebrity in England and throughout Europe. and he was being sent back to Tahiti, and with livestock, basically the ships, the Resolution and Discovery, were turned into Noah's Ark, which wasn't. Cook did not think too much of this anyway, but also other things, and sort of trying to sort of have a bond between Tahiti and England, because the Spanish were there as well, because of being in the Pacific, and the Spanish basically says, we own it all, everything in the Pacific we own, stay away. Yeah. So this was being done, and also Cook needed to lay something to rest that happened on the second expedition as well, in the South Island of of New Zealand. But they were getting ready to leave in the summer of 1776, and just to set Hampton Sides is pretty good at setting sort of the setting, the historical background for this too is, at that time there was, the child upstart in the New World, which then eventually was the American Revolution, was brewing and happening at this time. But also too, there were a number of officers on these ships that would be American. Um, so this was happening in the background. And also too, the Charles Clark was, oh, I'm sure is it John Clark? Um, oh, sorry, I'm a bit forgetful at the moment, but Clark, the captain of the Discovery, was delayed in leaving. So Cook left with the Resolution, and they said, "Well, we'll meet up in Cape Town, South Africa." Now, the reason why Clark was was delayed, he had previously basically co-signed and guaranteed loans for his brother, for a number of business schemes, and his brother lost the money and absconded. So Clark, Captain Clark, was hauled up and put in debtor's prison. So it took him a while to extricate himself from the prison. But while he was there, he contracted tuberculosis. And also, as it turns out, the doctor on the Discovery as well had tuberculosis. So these were dead men walking, basically. But he wasn't too bad when he left. So they met up. He left. They met up in Cape Town. And the errand that, before dropping off Mai in Tahiti, was to stop off at the southern island of New Zealand. Now there was many other stops before that as well, but this was a main incident. That on the second expedition, there was a party from the Adventurer that were slaughtered or killed by the locals and eaten, because they were cannibals. And Cook never got to the bottom of this, of what happened. So he believes that he got to the bottom of this, and that it was his men's fault, that this happened, that the skirmish happened. So Cook never blamed them, blamed the natives for this. To a bit of a disappointment of his men on the current voyage, there was a number of men that had served with Cook on previous voyages, or at least the second voyage, and they always found him to be a certain type of captain, a certain type of sailor, a certain type of man, and they were beginning to see differences in him as well. And these differences are shown also in his diaries and his logs, and Hampton Sides notes these. Um, he became a little more reckless than normal. He was always a bit reckless at times, but this kind of thing as well. Like he always had, like, he had a really sharp instinct and interest in scientific discovery. And that was waning a little bit at this time. And he also treated his men fair, maybe harsh at times, but fairly, and the same as the locals, the natives. But on this occasion, he was harsher at times, and he would fly into rages. But he was still like he was one of the best cartographers, according to Hampton sites, and this is what I've read before. He was very meticulous, and when he was making charts and drawing coastlines, they were almost perfect. And I believe it was during the second expedition he did Newfoundland, and Sides compares this, or somebody had compared a satellite view of Newfoundland to his charts, and they were almost identical. I'm sure there were other charts done before then that were maybe more accurate, but it is a dramatic way to compare them, obviously. So anyway, so they move on. They go to Tahiti, and again, there's an incident there, because like throughout all these islands and everything, the locals, the natives wanted metal, so there are the various things the women would trade um, their bodies, basically sexual pleasures, for metal, nails, and so forth. And but they would also steal. They would steal from the sailors. And there was an incident while they were building a house, like an English style house for Mai or Oh Mai, that they were bringing back, and a sexton or possibly another instrument was stolen, and Cook went absolutely ballistic. He didn't kill anybody, but he destroyed every canoe, their outriggers, destroyed livestock, and a lot of food. That the estimate could have been that it could take them, decades, if not a century, to gain back what was destroyed. There's not much more talking about that other than it's just remembered as well in sort of uh, the local memory of this. So, well, they leave anyway, and they're on their way to 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 the western seaboard of North America and Alaska to try to see if they can find a a passage through the North Pole, across the North Pole. They met other natives there at the time, and they spent a long time. He had specific instructions that below a certain longitude of, I think it was 65 degrees, that he wasn't to explore too much. And that would have been hard for the older Cook, but he sort of didn't do as much exploring off grid, I guess you would say, or off plan that he used to in the previous voyages. So he was a bit changed, and there was the thoughts that it might have been a sciatica that he had badly, that might have been cured or at least lessened by Tahitian massage women that did massage for him. Um, but he also crossed the Bering Strait, like, and he went to a Russian outpost on the coast. At that time, England and Russia was very close. But again, as I was saying, this is the period now of where the the American Revolution was going in full swing, and British ships weren't safe in American or any waters. Now, there is a good scene in here where well, not scene so much, but an incident where Ben Franklin had said, you know, well, I'll get to that in a second. But at the time that Ben Franklin said what I'm going to say, he said. Um, the French were coming in on the side of the Americans, so British had French interests as well. But here it's saying, despite all this and all the, everything to do with the British and the colonies and France, despite all of this, Benjamin Franklin would later make a point of lobbying among his colleagues for Captain Cook and the Resolution to be granted special immunity not afforded to other British ships. Should American vessels encounter Cook anywhere on the high seas, they were to give him leeway and clemency. Cook was on an assignment of transcendent importance for humanity, Franklin's proclamation asserted, one too important to be detained by squabbles between nations. Franklin made his remarks on what he called a passport addressed to the captains and commanders of all American ships. In case Cook's vessels should happen to fall into your hands, Franklin advised, you should not consider her as an enemy nor suffer any plunder to be made of the effects contained in her, nor obstruct her immediate return to England. Americans, he said, should treat the said Captain Cook with his and his people with all civility and kindness, affording them as common friends to mankind all the assistance in your power which they may happen to stand in need of. And yeah, that was something like that was totally new to me. Not that I'm an expert on Cook or any of this stuff, but it's just something that I would have thought would have been more known, but apparently it's not. But then it's interesting, like he Hampton sides goes on. The next paragraph starts the Spanish, like in other words, the Spanish on the other hand, basically thought they were spying and doing other things. So it was like to try to apprehend him if you caught any gist of him to track him down and stop him. So that was kind of interesting. So anyway, he wasn't able to. It was because he tried a lot of areas. The summer was waning and autumn was coming on. The ice was starting to the winter was going to be starting. So he wanted to hole up somewhere for the winter. Now he thought of going to the Russian side, which he would have been able to, but he thought his men could do a little better, in more tropical climes. And where they stayed was Hawaii, because up until their passage through there, they accidentally found the Hawaiian Islands, which they didn't expect to have any land mass there, and they were populated by the Polynesian as well, and they were friendly but a little standoffish on their first visit. And then so they decided, well, we need to replenish our supplies, do repairs and so forth, because they sprung a leak up near Alaska. And I think it was in the Resolution. So they needed all these repairs done. So they thought they'd go back to Hawaii, and they arrived at a time that there was a big sort of religious festival. And the Hawaiians, this is controversial, but the Hawaiians thought of Cook as a god, and they sort of put him up on a pedestal and everything. So and it's controversial whether, because he Sides talks about other historians saying that they didn't or that they did. So there's anthropological material for both and memories and so forth. But by the evidence that Sides gives, that is pretty clear they probably did, because he actually showed up at the right time in the right way, that made them think that. But once the festival was over and the idea of their god being, or a god being there, it's like, it's time for him to leave. And they were wondering, why aren't you leaving? Keep going, So Cook, was going to leave and go to one of the other islands. He was going to spend the rest of the time mapping the islands. But they ran into a storm and their main mast sort of basically split in half. or was badly damaged. So, and because of the shoreline, it was difficult to land or landfall on the shores. So they went back to the same location, which the Hawaiians were going, oy vey, they're back. They shouldn't be here. Go away. We don't want you now. Come back when you're wanted again, type of thing. But Cook did go back. He had made friends with the main chief, the king of the main Hawaiian island. So they're going to do the repairs, but the tension, it was a lot of tension between them, and this is where Cook was died. He was killed by the Hawaiians. There was more theft happening, tools and so forth. But actually, it was one of their boats that was stolen, and it was a boat that was really needed for the Arctic exploration, a cutter, and he like this is where Cook was a bit erratic in his thoughts, but he'd done this before, so he thought he'd, in essence, kidnap the king and then say, "You're only going to get him back if you return the boat." So, in the midst of doing that, though, well, another of his team were doing something else on the other side of the island. They killed a minor chief. So, and then warriors were coming, and they were afraid that he was going to kill their main king. So there was a kerfuffle, but Cook had sort of expected some resistance, and he had armed Marines with him. But a huge group of warriors came, and this is where it's a little unsure exactly what happened because there's various different stories. There's even the local stories, but Sides describes it quite well, where they sort of were took away their king, and they started to attack. And at some point, Cook realized, well, we got to retreat here, and he told his men, take to the boats. So they were doing that, but he didn't, and a couple others didn't stay. He didn't follow his own advice. So they started attacking them. And one of the ships under Lieutenant Williamson, or the boats, went out and stayed out. And while the other ones come back to try to defend and save Captain Cook. And at some point, there was a hand gesture or something like that. And that's why the second boat, they came back. He thought it was, come help. And then the other one, Lieutenant Williamson, that was command of the other boat, thought it was, stay, or at least that's what he said, stay away, save yourselves. Um, and he refused his men. They stayed out of sort of throwing range of stones that the Hawaiians were lobbing at them. And his men wanted to go back, and they were going to start shooting. And Lieutenant Williamson said, "Anybody who shoots, fires a gun, I'll kill them." And he just stayed there and watched, literally, while 3 or 4 other Marines were killed, and Captain Cook was killed, bludgeoned, stabbed repeatedly, and his corpse, mutilated and um, just mutilated. And this Lieutenant Williamson wouldn't go back to even try to get the body back because they knew that the body would be taken. And yeah, it's kind of like it's a bit of a jumble of what was happening there, but Size did it quite well of the description, because Lieutenant Williamson, most historians think that, well, he may not have been able to save Cook, but definitely they would have been able to get the body back. But also, if they acted earlier, they might have been able to save him, or at least they might have been able to save some of the other Marines. So he's and he was despised by the rest of the crew as well. He was sort of the most despised or second despised of the lot, because William Bligh, Captain Bligh, or eventually Captain Bligh, was a master. He was an officer on the Resolution, which is kind of interesting. So he was a hated officer as well by most of the men because he was very draconian, which we know what happened with the Bounty and Captain Bligh. Um, lots of little things in here. That's the thing that's great about this, and the people as well. So yeah, so and then you know Captain Cook was killed. They got some of his bones back and did a burial at sea. So Captain Clark took control and he took command of the Resolution and the expedition. And his second in command, I think his name was Gore, an American, became captain of the Discovery. So they eventually, did their repairs. They got out of there. They went back north to Alaska. They couldn't find any kind of inlet and for them to go across the North Pole. So then they eventually went back, to England, and they arrived in October 1880. After 1,530 some days at sea, and not one, as I say, person had died of scurvy. Uh, and Sides has an aside where he talks about that between 1600 and 1800, it's estimated approximately 2 million sailors died of scurvy, which was, I guess it's not surprising, but it's a big number. It's a very big number. I'm not sure exactly how they would know that fully, but I guess that's why it's an estimate. Um, but yeah, and the other things that are sort of interesting is that shortly after that, the Resolution was, I think, it was captured. They figured by the French, and then recommissioned and renamed as La Liberté, and possibly it sank in uh, a Rhode Island harbor there. And then, funny enough, his first ship, the Endeavour, also remains there. But a sliver of the oak was recovered from what they think could have been the Resolution, and that sliver of oak made a trip on Apollo 15 to the moon and back, which again is a cool thing to happen. There's and yeah, it's just a wonderful narrative that he weaves through here. Like I say, the things that I have, niggling things, and some a little more than a niggle, but there's no maps. At least they could have put a map on the end papers of the complete voyage. Not there. There's really there's end notes, but only for quotations. Like in the text, it'll say Captain Cook wrote X. So and so did this, or so and so said this, and then there's a note at the end, if you follow through the chapter and page number, of exactly where that quote came from, which is kind of cool, very useful. But it would be nice occasionally to have a little more extra information on a few of these things. Um, but he puts a lot of it in the text. But that's where, extra, asides are useful for big footnotes, which are kind of cool. Like, for instance, what happened to this Lieutenant Williamson, because he was called a coward, and like, I can understand why, but I'm surprised not one of the men on the boat there, while Captain Cook was being bludgeoned, that didn't put a bullet in the lieutenant, and then then they could have rowed in and tried to help. I can understand why it happened, but I'm surprised it didn't. Like, what happened to him? Like, he actually eventually, I looked him up, and he actually eventually lived to pretty good old age, almost to 1800, 1798, I think he died. But yeah, it just, he became first lieutenant by the time the ships got back to England of the Discovery. But yeah, it's just, there's little things like that would have been kind of nice. to see as extra, especially maps, like a full map, and then smaller maps of the areas uh, that he was exploring and was at. The bibliography is pretty good. On the whole, it's an excellent book, and if you're interested in Captain Cook at all, or North Pole exploration, it's a good book to have. And again, thank you, Freeman, for sending this to me. And the author, he's done another, well, a lot of other books that I'm interested in as well. So I will be looking for more books by this author. So again, thank you, and I do apologize for being over 30 minutes long. I was trying to do this slower, or I mean, less time, but well, it's a good book and it needs a bit of time. It's a good cookbook. Thank you, Book Two.